basketball win and an offensive line transfer portal addition? Really? All in the same weekend? Do we really get it all at once? Yes. Yes, you do. As Pitt basketball beats Syracuse on Saturday in the Dome, whatever they call it now, the Dome. And Pitt football added another transfer, an offensive lineman yesterday from the Big Ten. Looks like a pretty big addition, a pretty important addition for the offensive line in 2025. And all in all, it ended up being a pretty good weekend for Pitt. If you win a game, you get a key transfer, an important transfer at a position of need, I would say you had a pretty good weekend. And so in that regard, Pitt had a pretty good weekend. Let's look a little bit closer, though, at what the Panthers did at Syracuse and the offensive lineman that Pitt landed out of the transfer portal and see how these things all fit together. I got to be honest, I'm a little wishy-washy on the Syracuse game. Little lukewarm on that one. And with the offensive line transfer, we'll see. We'll see how he does. But we'll talk about it all here for the next 20 minutes to get your week started, get your Monday started. Boy, I just sounded really kind of morose about this whole thing. I'm not. I mean, Pitt needed to break a losing streak. They were on a 4-game losing streak. They went on the road in a conference game, and they won it. That's huge. It's huge to break the losing streak. It's huge to get a conference win. It's huge to get a win on the road. And it's huge to avoid a bad loss, which Pitt has done successfully all season thus far. So, see, it was a good thing. Well, let's not pretend that I'm too wishy-washy or lukewarm on it. And on the offensive line, look, we know Pitt needs offensive line help. It wasn't enough to take 2 transfer offensive linemen. They needed twice as many, 3 times as many as that. Well, they haven't gotten that far yet, but they've gotten up to 3, which I think is important. And I think all these guys are probably going to help in 2025. There, we got a little bit better energy on that intro, didn't we? We got a little bit more life and enthusiasm into the news from the weekend. Let's break down the weekend, everything that happened on Saturday and Sunday here on the Morning Pit to get your week started. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't have the necessary enthusiasm for a Monday morning there in the intro. Maybe I got a case of the Mondays, and who doesn't? Although, maybe it's warming up. I don't know. We'll see if this week is any warmer than last week, but it doesn't matter because it's always we always got the hot takes here on the Morning Pit on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, right. This show is like the antithesis of hot takes. We don't have any hot takes on anything, and maybe we need to spice it up in that regard. Maybe I need to start advocating for people to get fired, or maybe sometimes the hottest takes in Pitt sports land is to advocate for people to get contract extensions. Either way, we'll try and get them a little more lively and exciting about this. I had slightly mixed feelings about that game at Syracuse on Saturday. And this is probably going to be a phrase I repeat over and over again today, tomorrow, this week. But if this team is who we all thought they could be, if this team is who we all thought they should be, and if this team is who we all thought they were going to be, a 4-point win at Syracuse doesn't exactly cut it. Now, I'll be the first to say that, you get... I think you have to understand the difficulty of winning games in the conference on the road. It's hard. It's not easy to win on the road in general, and particularly in conference games. We should have learned that lesson 20 years ago when we watched very good Pitt teams, better than the current Pitt team, go on the road in the Big East against good quality competition and lose, and good quality teams coming to the Peterson Event Center and lose. Where it was really got to a point where you understood that the real upsets in conference play were the games when the road team won, with great exception. Unless you had the number one team playing at the worst team in the conference, if the road team won among similarly talented teams, that was a big upset. Or if not a big upset, it was an upset. And so it's not easy to win on the road. It's not easy to win on the road in conference. And so I don't take anything away from that. And I'm not going to say I don't want to sit here and say, oh, they only won by 4. If they were really that good, they would have won by 8 or 12, which is what it should have been. And look, I picked them to win by 12. So I thought so too. And maybe that's part of why I'm slightly lukewarm on the results there. It wasn't the kind of game that I think this team should be capable of having. I don't think this team should need free throws in the final minute to pull out a 4-point win. over Syracuse, who's not very good. They've got some talented players. Starling's good. Lampkin is good. Those guys are very good at the things that they do. Bell, but if this team is, again, here I am. I'm repeating it already. I only made it like 2 minutes before I repeated it. If they are as good as we think they're supposed to be, as we all believe they were going to be, they would do better than a 4-point win at Syracuse. They would do better than, needing free throws in the final minute to get that win. Our good friend DT Pitt on the message board said, it's not so much of a bounce back win as much as it was a matter of survival. And I think there's a lot of positive sides to this game from Saturday. A lot of crucial elements. Breaking a 4-game losing streak, is huge. This team needed a game just to go in their favor. They needed to win a game. And that's not to say that the last 4 games that they lost were all out of their control and they had nothing to do with the outcome. But it is to say that they needed something positive. You can't keep losing like that. You can't let that losing keep going, and because it does snowball. And the more you lose, the more it picks up momentum. And so they were able to stem that tide. They were able to hold that back, break the losing streak, get a win, and that's big. I think they got a pretty good game out of Jalen Lowe. That Ishmael Leggett, Damian Dunn played well. Cam Corrin had his moments in his sort of uniquely Cam Corrin way. They ran some nice set offenses. They got good looks and good passes into the paint, but they were playing against a not very good defensive team in Syracuse. Now, kudos to them for being able to take advantage of it and score 77 points. But again, kind of expected more. And not just like, well, I think you should win every game by 12 points, but, if you're the caliber of team that we think you are, that can have the kind of success we think you can have in the postseason run that we think you're capable of, then you probably got to do better than beating Syracuse by 4. You should be better than that. And there are common themes that keep coming up. And, we'll probably dig into this more tomorrow because we'll talk about it in advance of the North Carolina game. We'll talk a lot of basketball tomorrow. But rebounding, defense, and these slow starts, these poor first halves. It's a major issue. And it was even an issue in the games they were winning. In some of those non-conference games, they were falling behind in the first half, mounting a comeback, and then dominating the second half. And that's cool against Sam Houston or Eastern Kentucky or whoever they did it against. And they were able to get away with it against some of those early ACC teams. But you can't get away with it when you're playing Clemson and Duke and Louisville. You can't get away with it when you're playing on the road. They were able to overcome it on Saturday, but it's certainly not something you can continue to make a habit of. And the slow first halves are tied into the poor defense and the poor rebounding. But those issues continue into the second half. Pitt has just been able to overcome them to some extent sometimes. It's just concerning. It's concerning. Even when you see the things that they do well, you just wonder if they can do those things well, if there's enough of those things, and if they can do them well enough to overcome the defense, the rebounding, and the slow starts in the first half. It's concerning. They got to win, and that's good, but I don't know if it inspired a lot of confidence for what they're going to be able to do going forward. And they'll get a good test tomorrow night. A really late game. I wish it wasn't at 9:00, but it is. But they're going to get a good test. And flawed Carolina team, it's a team that certainly is beatable. It even looks like it might not be able to take advantage of Pitt's shortcomings in the way that some of these other opponents have been able to. But if you continue to get beat on the boards, if you continue to play poor defensively, and you continue to have slow first halves, slow starts to the games, then you're susceptible to losing to anybody. And that's concerning. I don't know how many Jalen Lowe drives and kicks can overcome that. Even well-executed plans to get a dunk for Cam Corrin, I'm not sure they can overcome that. And there's a lot of reasons why they're not great at rebounding and not great at defense and so on and so forth. But these big issues are a concern. And there's a decent amount of time left in this season. There's still, 8 regular season games left? Or no, 12. They've played 8 ACC games. They have 12 left. That's a lot of time for you to try to improve and get better. It's a lot of time for things to turn the other way. I'm not jumping off the bridge about this team. I'm not, getting off the bandwagon or anything like that. I still think they can be really good. I'm starting to wonder if they can be as good as I thought they would. If they can really reach that potential. And I'm starting to wonder whether I overjudged that potential, overestimated that potential, or just misread it. And it's probably a little bit of both. But they got to win. That's the most important thing. They were able to break the losing streak. That's the most important thing. And now they'll get a chance to build it to 2 with tomorrow night's game. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, we'll talk more basketball, but we do have to get into a little bit of football transfer talk. That's right. Yesterday brought a little bit of news on the football transfer side as Pitt added a transfer commitment, an offensive lineman, not made public as of the time we recorded this last night, but we reported it through sources that Pitt is getting Michigan offensive lineman, grad transfer offensive lineman Jeff Percy. He's played a little bit of tackle, played a little bit of guard, but he's a giant human being, listed at 6'8", 310 on Michigan's website. He's, coming to Pitt, I believe, to play tackle, potentially, be in a competition with Ryan Baer and Kendall Stanley, the transfers coming in from Charlotte for those two tackle positions. And Percy, Baer, and Stanley can sort of duke it out, and I think 2 of them will be the starting tackles, and the other one will be a starting guard. This is an important addition. And Percy, he's played about 41 games over the course of his career. He started a handful, moved back and forth a little bit between tackle and guard. Probably wasn't the 4-year starter that Michigan expected him to be when they recruited him out of high school in the class of 2020. He was a 4-star prospect, top 35 offensive tackle in the class. And they probably expect him to be a 3-year starter, 4-year starter, something like that. It hasn't exactly worked out that way, but he looks like a talented guy. He's played a lot of football. He's been in a winning program and played at the highest level. He's gone through 4 years of a strength and conditioning program. I mean, this is a pretty ideal ad. This is a guy who potentially, seems like, was in line for a starting job at Michigan next season. He decides to go into the transfer portal as a grad transfer, and he ends up coming to Pitt, where there is certainly a need along the offensive line. I think we all know there's a need along the offensive line. I think we've all said many times that there's a need along the offensive line, and it's something that they've needed to address in the portal. And it looked for a while like they might only end up with the 2 offensive line transfers that they had already received, Kendall Stanley from Charlotte, and Keith Gouveia from Richmond. Looked like they might be the only 2 guys, and I was just as shocked as you were. Could they really only take 2 offensive linemen out of the transfer portal? Seems like they needed more. And it wasn't just a perception thing. They needed more. They needed more offensive linemen to come in. Last year exposed how thin the depth is on the offensive line at Pitt, and they needed to bulk it up with transfers. And so they 2 wasn't going to be enough. 3 is probably the bare minimum, and really they need more. I guess 2 technically could have been the bare minimum, but I would not have batted an eye if they had tried to sign, or if they had signed 4 or 5 offensive linemen out of the transfer portal. I think the situation is that important. I think they're committed to Eli Holstein as the franchise quarterback for this program, and understandably so, and rightfully so, I think. Then you got to protect him. You're going into next season expecting Eli Holstein and Desmond Reed to carry this team and lead this team to a lot of victories and a lot of success. Well, you need to block for those guys. You need to protect Eli Holstein. You need to open holes for Desmond Reed to allow them to make all those plays, to allow them to lead your team to all those wins. And so they went out in the portal, and they're bringing in 3 guys who I think are all going to be, 2 deep at a minimum, and starters, I would seem at least 2, if not all 3, will be in the starting lineup next season. That's an important ad, and it's the most important ads of the offseason. I think when you went into the end of the regular season, you were like, what does Pitt need out of the transfer portal? What are the biggest needs? It was offensive line, and you could list it like 4 times. Pass rusher was high on that list. They really needed somebody, and they got a handful of guys there. There were 3 defensive ends that they're bringing in to play. And I think all those guys will contribute in 2025. But it was really about the offensive line. It was really about protecting Eli Holstein. It was really about blocking for Desmond Reed, because those are the guys who are going to be the reason this team wins. I mean, if Reed and Holstein stay healthy and productive and the offensive line stays intact last season, they don't go 7-6. They don't lose 6 games in a row. In the regular season, they don't go 7-5. They go 9-3, 10-2, something like that. I think realistically, a fully healthy squad, you could say, yeah, I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to say they go 10-2, and only lose SMU and Louisville. Because the Virginia game was there to be won. The Boston College game was a game they should have won. And the Clemson game was right there for them. And I think with a healthy offensive line and healthy Eli Holstein and healthy Desmond Reed, they win those games. And that's the difference. And like, you could really get hyper specific and really zoom in on the micro and say, look, one injury on the offensive line, Branson Taylor's injury, derailed this season and led to 6 straight losses. Now, there's more to it than that. There's a lot of, there were a bunch of injuries. There were a bunch of questionable decisions. There was, a bunch of false starts at the goal line and all this stuff. There were a lot of things that went wrong to sink the season. But if you boiled it down to one biggest factor, it's Branson Taylor getting hurt and not having the depth to really cover for that. Now, most teams are not going to be able to replace their starting left tackle and have no drop-off. But Pitt's offensive line cratered, and the offense by extension cratered after Taylor got hurt. And so it was an absolute need. It was the top of the priority list to get offensive linemen in the transfer portal. And it seemed like it was going to be a bit of malpractice to only take 2. They've rectified that to some degree by getting a third. We're still gathering details on Jeff Percy and how he's going to fit in, when he's going to get to campus. It's pretty late in the spring semester. Academics are still a thing. I know. It's a surprise to everyone. Every time I mention this to someone, they're like, wait, really? That still matters? Yes, it still does matter. Academics are still a relevant component. So we'll see when Jeff Percy is going to get here. Ideally, he would get in like yesterday and start classes and go to spring camp so he can be integrated into the offensive line and learn the offense and all of that. But I think it's an important ad, a big ad, certainly big in the literal sense, because like I say, he's 6'8" and 310 pounds. So he's a big dude, and he's going to join Pitt's offensive line and help bolster that group up front. All right, tomorrow we'll get you ready for Pitt, Carolina, and talk about everything else going on in the world of Pitt sports. Look forward to it. Should be a big week for Pitt sports here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, as well as Panther-Lair.com, where everybody's talking about all these things, all the conversations we have here during these videos. We have right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the best place to get your Pitt sports news. All right. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I hope your Monday gets off to a great start. I hope you had a great weekend, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.